Welcome to Journey Onward. Journey Onward is held twice a year in the months of January and July to refresh our church's vision. It is a platform for us to reinforce and highlight the focus of the year that lines up with the vision. Now first, let us refresh our church vision, okay? It's to become a spirit-filled, fervently praying church family, raising generations of disciples and servant leaders, and impacting our community and beyond for Christ. And so for the purpose of unpacking our vision, in terms of core values, in our Christian education, we have used 3 Latin terms to sort of represent this area. The spirit-filled area, we call it Spiritus Vitae, which really is a spiritual life that's focused on Scripture, Scripture-based prayer, contemplative practices of silence, solitude. The generations of disciples, we call it Imago Christi, because the end point of discipleship and servant leadership is Christ-likeness. And in our church, we focus on mentoring, the idea that you journey with others, whether it's your peers or people who have gone ahead of you. And finally, impacting the community and beyond, we call it Missio Dei, mission of God, because this provides the big picture of what God is doing. To understand what God is doing and then aligning our lives, we focus on our immediate community, whether it's around the church or around ourselves, our homes, especially using our gifts at the workplace as the church, not simply at the church. And so as we look at this, our focus in 2022 is following Jesus. Friends, as we journey through the COVID endemic, how do we live with COVID? The answer is nothing more and nothing less than following Jesus. That does not change despite the changes in our circumstances. So in January, we want to talk about the journey of following Jesus. That it is a pilgrimage. And what happens on the pilgrimage? So, in Journey Onward, we ask you 3 questions. The first, how are you? You're dealing with pit stops, disciplines of silence, solitude, worship. These pit stops help us to take stock of our relationship with God. How are you? Secondly, who's with you? People that we travel with, people that we mentor or mentor us, especially relationships in which we invest our time and energy as spiritual friends. Who's with you? And the third question is, what do we bring with us? We need to be equipped on this journey. So without further ado, we'd like to jump into the first session that asks the question, how are you? And I'd like to hand this time over to Pastor David.
Good morning. And in case you are listening to this at any other time of the day, good afternoon or good evening. I was with someone having coffee yesterday, and he asked me a question about the current COVID pandemic. Why has God brought this upon us? Why? Why is this happening to us? You know that this COVID pandemic has been going on for coming to 2 years. It's a crisis, and it is an extended crisis. Well, what I told my friend is that when God sends us a crisis, let's not waste it. In every crisis, there are opportunities for us to learn and opportunities for us to grow. So to answer the question, what is God saying to us in the midst of this prolonged crisis? Well, I think God is giving us a pause. God is giving the world a pause. God is giving each one of us a pause. And the pause is a necessary pause. We need that pause. It is a pause in time. It's a pause in noise. And it is also a pause from the company of people. All these are necessary pauses that have been imposed on us by the current pandemic. First of all, let's look at a pause in time. You know, we are all by nature impatient. Waiting is hard. And in this pandemic, we are waiting. We are waiting for it to be over. We are waiting for things to get better. We are waiting for an opportunity to travel again. We are waiting for so many things. And we are getting impatient because this waiting has gone on for a bit too long. I think there are two reasons why we are basically impatient. We are short of time. We are short of patience. One, internally by nature, I think we're impatient because we always want things our way, our time, according to our schedule. But this impatience has been aggravated by what's happening outside of us. That's technology. It's an irony, isn't it? Because technology has made things easier for us, quicker for us. I remember in those old days, we used to have to go to the bank to do a transaction. We have to go to the bank, we have to stand in the line, we have to wait at the counter for things to be done. Nowadays, you can do everything on your phone, and it takes only a couple of minutes, sometimes just seconds. And yet, it has not made us more patient. The irony is the faster things are done, the more impatient we get when things are not done more quickly. So COVID has imposed on us this pause in time. COVID has made us wait. It has basically hit what we call the pause button. The pause button. A pause in time to reflect, to turn inward from the outward. A pause in time for God, to speak to God, and for God to speak to us. We hardly have time for God when we are busy, running around, doing a lot of things. So the pause button allows us to stop and take time for God, for ourselves, as well as for people. To be patient with people, to learn to wait on one another. But this pause button is not the only button that is pressed during this pandemic. There's another button I call the mute button. Because it's not a pause in time, there's also a pause in noise. COVID has brought about silence. I still remember when the circuit breaker, the lockdown happened last year. I had to bring my wife to the polyclinic, and I didn't want to wait for the polyclinic, so I went down to the bus stop. I sat at the bus stop at a very busy junction in Clementi, and for the first time I saw no vehicle on the road. There was hardly anyone on the road. There was this eerie, strange silence. That's what happened when COVID struck last year. Well, things had opened up a little, but we needed that pause in noise. You know how activities are being restricted, crowds and noise are curtailed. There's silence on the roads, in the skies, in factories, at work sites, less people working, even in offices and malls. I'm sure there are times when you have gone to the mall and found that it was empty, hardly anyone around. Silence. Silence is necessary because noise stops so that we can listen better. Silence to listen to God, to listen to His, what the Bible calls the still small voice. Remember how God spoke to Elijah? Not in the fire, not in the whirlwind, not in the earthquake, but in a still small voice, in a whisper. And if we are not silent, we will never hear God speaking to us in the soft whisper. When there's a pause and noise, we also stop talking and we start listening. We also listen to ourselves. We begin to look at ourselves and hear what we're saying to ourselves. We get to know ourselves a little better. And of course, when we hit the mute button, we rediscover what it means to commune with God, to listen to Him speaking to us. So we've hit the pause button, we've hit the mute button. There's one more button we need to hit in the midst of this crisis, and that's the reset button. This is when we take a pause from company, from people, from the crowd, and we retreat into solitude. Solitude to seek the Lord, to reset our lives. So COVID forces us to be alone. Safe distancing means we can get too close to people. We can no longer shake hands or hug. Some people find it painful, not to be close to people, especially to people they loved. One time I remember during the circuit breaker, I couldn't even hug my granddaughter. I had to speak to her while she was standing on the balcony and I was at the car park below. Now there's this distance that was created, this pause from people. But COVID has forced us to spend time in solitude. Some have to be quarantined in a hotel, in a room, in their home. We're told to avoid crowds, especially for those of us who belong to the vulnerable age group. And this being alone has brought about loneliness for many people. But being alone doesn't mean that we need to be lonely. Jesus sought solitude. He made time to be alone to commune with his Father. And he also told his disciples to withdraw from people to a solitary place and rest. And we need that solitude, we need that time out. We need that pause from company to rest, to recover, and to reset. So to answer my friend's question, why has God brought this pandemic upon the world, upon us? Well, maybe it is His way of telling us that we need to have a necessary pause in our lives. To hit the pause button, to hit the mute button, and to hit the reset button, to take a pause in time, a pause in noise, and a pause from company. So my prayer is that as we go through this crisis, and we don't know how long it's going to last, but we will come out of this crisis better people. We will be drawn closer to the Lord, and we will grow more and more like Jesus. That's my prayer, and I hope that that's your prayer too. Thank you.
Thank you, Pastor David, for reminding us of the 3 buttons we learned in COVID-19. Pause, mute, reset. That we can press on this journey. On a pilgrimage, we must be clear of our destination. So let me share with you this last paragraph of the Pilgrim's Progress. It's an allegory written by John Bunyan in the 1600s while he was imprisoned for his faith. It is about a journey of the protagonist called Christian through his life and struggles with his faith until he ended in heaven. The last paragraph of the book, he says, "Now just as the gates were opened to let in the men, I looked in after them, and behold, the city shone like the sun, and the streets also were paved with gold. And in them walked many men with crowns on their heads, palms in their hands, and golden harps to sing praises. There were also with them people with wings, and they answered one another without intermission, saying, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord. And after that they shut up the gates, which when I had seen, wished myself among them. Now while I was gazing upon these things, I turned back and I saw ignorance coming up the river. But he soon got over, and that without half the difficulty which the other 2 men met with. For it happened that there was there in that place a vain hope, a ferryman that with his boat helped ignorance over. So ignorance went up the hill to the gate, but he came alone, There was no one to meet him or to encourage him. When he came to the gate, he looked up at the writing that was above and began to knock, thinking that the entrance should be quickly opened to him. But he was asked by the people who looked over the gate, "Where did you come from, and what are you doing?" And he answered, "I've eaten and drank in the presence of the king. He has taught in our streets." And they had asked him for a certificate that they might go in to show it to the king. But he fumbled in the bosom for one and couldn't find any. Then they said, "Don't you have a certificate?" And the man didn't answer. So they went to tell the king, but the king would not come down to see him, but instead commanded the two angels that had helped Christian and hopeful into the city to go and take out ignorance, to bind his hands and foot and take him away. Friends, in John Bunyan's allegory, he ended with this description of the celestial city. And that is our destination as followers of Christ, when we see God face to face, and where people who are not in Christ, like ignorance, will have to stand up to God's wrath based on their own merits, and they will not be able to do so. So we mustn't forget our destination. Now, does it mean that we get a ticket to heaven and then we just live our lives as we please? Certainly not. Along the way, to make that sure that this life is most meaningful and to experience happiness, how do we do it? Because everyone wants to be happy, but how? Recently, I read the story of this Wang Li-hong, right? A famous singer and actor. He is actually an ABC, American-born Chinese. He was once the hottest star in China. And he was always claimed to be a Christian, and that it was God's grace that allowed him to pursue music. Indeed, he believed that God wanted him to use music to be a testimony for him. This week, he finalized his divorce with his wife of 8 years. She had always been supportive of him and even believed that God wanted to use him. But in this week, she revealed the ugly details of his life, his affairs with fans, prostitutes, his neglect of his children. And it's quite saddening, though I may say not surprising. But this was a man who had it all: good looks, fame, money, beautiful, supportive wife, a good reputation, and now it's all down the chutes. He reminds me of all those characters in Pilgrim's Progress that never made it to the celestial city. Friends, in our journey of following Jesus, it is truly a journey, and we must bear the destination in mind, understanding that this journey takes a lifetime. So how do we experience meaning, purpose, happiness? That's to grow more and more Christ-like, to know our Creator, to bring Him the most glory. What we need to know is God is most glorified in us when we are most satisfied in Him. And to get there is a journey. So in January and February this year, we'll be studying the Psalms of Ascent from the pulpit. There's Psalms 120 to 134 to give us insights on this pilgrimage. See, each year the Israelites have to make 3 pilgrimages to Jerusalem. Between these 3 feasts, the people live their realities of daily discipleship until the time came for them to go up to Jerusalem as pilgrims to renew the covenant. And so I think these Psalms provide a reminder and points of reflection for us as we follow Christ. William Faulkner says of these Psalms, he said they are not monuments, but footprints. What's the difference? A monument only says, at least I got this far. But a footprint says, this is where I was when I moved again. It's a recognition of following Jesus is a journey of long obedience in the same direction. We're constantly moving, submitting, obeying. And so on this journey, we need pit stops along the way to reflect, to realign, to refresh. But journey of lifetime certainly isn't easy. I remember Joyce Rupp as how she describes our life as we grow. She said the experience of God varies with each person, but many relationships with God take a huge tumble into confusion and emptiness as we proceed in life. Religious beliefs go limp. The God who we once have known for many years, becomes a stranger. The sturdy ground of faith is swept away, and the long stretches of darkness and feelings of abandonment or disconnect with the divine presence. Does that describe your experience or what you're going through right now? Maybe we are deeply grounded in the doctrines and practices of our church. Maybe even active in ministry and leadership. Our understanding of God and His ways used to be clear and certain. Our faith largely untested. However, as we walk with Christ, as we mature, you realize that the world is not so straightforward. Life has a way of becoming complicated as we grow older. So does faith. Relationships fail. Career stalls. Relationships and works are unsatisfying. Our health are declining. Or maybe it's an unanswered prayer. Questions about the Bible. Maybe we begin to feel that church is boring, no longer relevant. Or perhaps you're just exhausted by the demands of life and church. And not a few will then feel disappointed with God, with fellow believers, or with ourselves. And so all these lead to a cooling down of what was once a very enthusiastic faith. Some hang on to church but take a back seat. Others drop out altogether, give up their faith, or develop a privatized religion of their own. While we may feel lonely in this struggle and feel like we are losing our faith in God, perhaps we are just finding our faith. Friends, this is a well-worn path of discipleship. Early beliefs are tested and tried. Faith that was passed on must be internalized and made our own. Only then can our faith grow strong and robust, enough to take us forward. So we need these pit stops to pause, to mute, to reset, to be refreshed and re-energized. So that instead of feeling more cynicism, lukewarmness, unbelief, jadedness, we grow deeper in our faith, more rooted, more tested, more robust, more contentment. That is when God is most glorified and we find ourselves most happy. Are you taking pit stops to realign your life to God's, to wait upon Him, to hear from Him, to allow His love to fill you? To get to the destination, important questions we ask in this Journey Onward series. How are you? Who's with you? And what's with you? Now we have some questions of what you have just heard. May you, in your DG, reflect on these questions and share what you have learned. Thank you. you.